They fined me $500 from my rooster crowing on my grandfather's 1967 GI Bill land, claiming it disturbed Karen's beauty sleep, then tried evicting me over a shed standing since Nixon. At 5 a.m. I rolled concrete barriers across their clubhouse parking lot. Their faces turned purple when they learned I owned every inch of it. HOAs pulled this nonsense everywhere. What's the pettiest rule yours try to enforce? Comment your story and where you're from. By the end, they're presidents in handcuffs for forging documents, and you'll know exactly how to crush petty tyrants stealing your land. My name's Maverick Donovan, and I'm a third-generation cattle rancher in Pine Valley Estates, Texas. My grandfather bought this 40-acre spread back in 1967 with his GI Bill money and the smell of determination. Every morning I wake up to the sound of his old wind chimes on the porch and the rich scent of leather and hay drifting from the barn he built with his own hands. This ranch isn't just property, it's family history. My kids, Skylar and Brady, both teenagers now, spent their childhood summers learning to ride, mend fences, and understand what it means to work the land. After my divorce last year, this place became even more important. Its stability in a world that seems hell-bent on changing everything good about rural America. But here's where things get interesting. When Grandpa first settled here, Pine Valley was nothing but ranch land and farm-to-market roads. Over the years, developers started circling like vultures, and slowly but surely $800,000, 0-cent McMansions sprouted up around us like weeds after rain. Along came a golf course, perfectly manicured lawns, and homeowners who think roosters crowing at dawn is some kind of personal assault. Enter Veronica Ashworth, HOA president, real estate attorney, and the kind of woman who drives a white BMW X7 and believes her law degree gives her the right to control everyone else's life. She moved here from some Dallas suburb, always dressed in business casual, with a fake smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. You know the type, voice gets higher when she's lying, which is pretty much every time she opens her mouth. The harassment started small. I'd come home from feeding cattle to find violation notices zip-tied to my gate, livestock odor complaints, unsightly structures, referring to my grandfather's 100-year-old barn, excessive noise violations, for roosters doing what roosters have done since the dawn of time. Then came the daily drive-bys. Veronica would cruise past in that pristine BMW, sometimes stopping to take photos with her phone. The smell of her overwhelming perfume would linger even after she left, mixing with the honest scent of cattle and grass in a way that made my stomach turn. The sound of her heels clicking on my wooden porch became as unwelcome as nails on a chalkboard. The certified letters started arriving weekly, $500 a day in fines, demands for a compliance plan, threats of liens against property that's been in my family longer than their subdivision has existed. My mail carrier, old Pete Henderson, would shake his head apologetically every time he handed me another legal envelope. The real kicker came when my kids started getting uninvited from neighborhood pool parties. Suddenly, parents who used to wave and smile would avoid eye contact at the grocery store. The social isolation was surgical and deliberate. That's when I found the smoking gun, completely by accident. Pete delivered a letter to my address that was meant for the house next door. Inside was a correspondence between Veronica and something called Pinnacle Development Group. They wanted to buy my ranch, rezone it for commercial and residential expansion, and had a profit-sharing agreement already drawn up. A timeline was aggressive. They needed my property within 18 months to meet investor commitments. Every violation notice, every harassment campaign, every attempt to paint me as a bad neighbor was really just part of a coordinated effort to force me to sell. The betrayal cut deep when I realized Mrs. Patterson, the sweet elderly lady who always brought cookies at Christmas, was actually on the HOA board and had been reporting every detail of my family's activities. The sound of trust breaking is quieter than you'd expect, just a small crack that echoes in your chest. But here's what Veronica and her cronies didn't know about this old rancher. I don't back down from a fight, especially when someone threatens my family's legacy. They picked the wrong cowboy to mess with. The real war began on a Monday morning when I found stop work order signs zip-tied to my fence overnight. According to these official-looking notices, I was apparently running unpermitted structures and committing environmental violations on my own damn property. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had been environmental stewards here since before these people knew Texas existed. By Tuesday, Channel 7 News was running a story about an industrial ranch polluting an upscale neighborhood. Some anonymous tip, they said. The reporter stood right there on the public road, filming my barn like it was a toxic waste facility instead of a piece of American agricultural history. Wednesday brought the Next Door app nightmare. Veronica had organized her army of concerned citizens, posting misleading photos of my property with captions like, "Is this what we want our children exposed to?" and "Property values plummeting due to one selfish neighbor." The comments section read like a lynch mob with Wi-Fi. The county inspector showed up Thursday morning, clipboard in hand and an apologetic expression on his face. "I'm sorry, Mr. Donovan," he said, the smell of fresh coffee still on his breath. "Got to follow up on these complaints." He spent 3 hours going through my operation and found exactly nothing wrong. Still, it cost me a day's work and my peace of mind. Friday's entertainment was the fire marshal called in for alleged burn pile violations. I showed him my agricultural burn permit, perfectly legal and up to date. The marshal, a good old boy named Chuck, just shook his head and muttered something about people with too much time and too little sense. That weekend, I decided it was time to do some detective work of my own. Saturday morning found me at the county courthouse, digging through incorporation papers and property records. The musty smell of old documents and the fluorescent lighting reminded me of studying for finals back in college, except the stakes were a lot higher now. What I discovered made my blood run cold and hot at the same time. According to the original 1967 survey, that fancy HOA clubhouse and its pristine parking lot were built on 2.3 acres that legally belonged to my family's property. The recreation easement my grandfather granted was for community use, not ownership transfer. The legal implications hit me like a sledgehammer. This HOA had been collecting dues, making improvements, and acting like they owned land that was never legally transferred to them. They just spent $30,000, 0 cents, on new parking lot pavement, landscaping, and lighting systems on my property. Monday morning, I called my cousin Jake's friend who does land surveying. By Wednesday, we had GPS coordinates and steel property pins confirming what the courthouse records showed. The satisfaction of watching that survey crew work was better than Christmas morning, every measurement proving what I already knew in my gut. Here's a knowledge nugget that might save your bacon someday. Adverse possession laws in Texas require 10+ years of open, continuous use without the owner's permission. The key word is permission. My grandfather's recreation easement actually prevented them from claiming ownership. Takeaway: always verify property boundaries when buying homes near older properties. Survey pins don't lie. I met with Miranda Torres, a property rights attorney from the next county over, keeping things quiet and away from local connections. Her office smelled like leather law books and determination. "This is a slam dunk case," she said, spreading the survey maps across her mahogany desk. "But let's be strategic about timing." The beautiful part? I decided to let them keep making improvements on my land. Every dollar they spent on that parking lot was essentially a gift to the rightful property owner. The taste of future victory was sweeter than my grandmother's peach cobbler. Meanwhile, something unexpected started happening. Longtime residents, the families who lived here before the HOA existed, began quietly reaching out. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been here since 1975, brought me a box of old neighborhood maps and documents her late husband had saved. "That woman's been harassing everyone," she whispered, glancing around like Veronica might be hiding in the hedgerows. The local veterans group that meets at my ranch monthly became an informal intelligence network. Retired cop Tommy Williams, county clerk's office veteran Sue Martinez, and electrical contractor Bill Rodriguez, they all had stories about Veronica's harassment campaigns and questionable HOA practices. But Veronica wasn't done escalating. She organized an emergency HOA meeting to propose a special assessment for a legal action fund. The audacity was breathtaking, asking homeowners to pay for the privilege of harassing their neighbor. She started spreading rumors about my financial troubles and questioning my fitness as a single parent. When the state veterinarian showed up unannounced, claiming anonymous reports about diseased cattle, I knew the gloves were officially off. The vet spent 2 hours examining healthy livestock and left shaking his head about malicious reporting. The sound of my phone ringing with complaints from bureaucrats became the soundtrack of my daily life. But with each harassment attempt, my resolve hardened like steel in a forge. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick as a phone book and twice as threatening. Pinnacle Development's law firm had joined forces with the HOA, serving me an official eviction notice, citing nuisance abatement. The legal language was dense enough to choke a horse, but the message was crystal clear. Get out or we'll take everything. According to their calculations, I owed $47,000, 0 cents in accumulated fines and fees. $47,000 for the crime of existing on my own property. They were threatening foreclosure, liens, and enough legal paperwork to wallpaper my barn. The audacity left me speechless, but only for about 30 seconds. That afternoon, my local newspaper published the legal notice. There's something particularly humiliating about seeing your family's name dragged through the mud in print, the black ink seeming to mock 3 generations of honest work. Every neighbor who picked up their paper would read about the pending litigation against the Donovan Ranch. The psychological warfare intensified when letters started arriving at my teenager's school. Suddenly, guidance counselors were asking Skylar and Brady questions about their stable home environment. The taste of parental fury is metallic and sharp, like biting down on aluminum foil. Time to bring in the big guns. I hired Miranda Torres officially, and her first move was brilliant. Demand that the HOA produce all incorporation documents, financial records, and property deeds. The sound of legal discovery is like distant thunder. You know the storm's coming, but you're not sure when it'll hit. Miranda also filed a public records request for all county communications regarding my property. What came back was enlightening: a coordinated campaign involving the HOA, development group, and suspiciously helpful county officials. The paper trail was longer than a Texas highway and twice as damning. Here's another knowledge nugget that could save your property. In Texas, HOAs must provide annual audits and transparent financial records to homeowners upon request. Most people don't know they have this right, and corrupt boards count on that ignorance. Takeaway: always demand financial transparency. Honest organizations have nothing to hide. The real bombshell came when Miranda confirmed my suspicions about the parking lot ownership. We quietly filed a title action, but kept it under wraps while building our case. The legal machinery was moving, but slowly and deliberately, like a combine harvester working a field. 3 other families came forward with similar stories: boundary disputes, excessive fees, and selective enforcement that seemed designed to force them out. The smell of corruption was getting stronger than cattle on a hot summer day. We formed an informal alliance, sharing legal costs and information through an encrypted messaging group that Jake's IT buddy set up. The personal attacks escalated when anonymous letters started arriving at my workplace. The feed store owner, a decent man named Earl, who'd known my family for decades, called me into his office with a troubled expression. "Maverick, I got some strange letters questioning your mental stability and talking about violent tendencies," he said, the absurdity clear in his voice. "Figure you should know someone's trying to mess with your livelihood." Then came the morning my cattle gate was mysteriously left open. I found my herd scattered across the golf course, munching on expensive fairway grass like it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. The irony was delicious, but the implications were serious. Someone was escalating to sabotage, and they were using my own livestock as weapons. Veronica held an impromptu press conference on the golf course, surrounded by damaged turf and pointing dramatically at my negligent ranching practices. The local TV cameras ate it up, but what they didn't know was that my new security system had captured everything, including the footage of her nephew cutting my fence at 2 a.m. The stress was getting to everyone. My ex-wife started making noises about custody modifications, my kids were dealing with social isolation at school, and I was drinking too much coffee and not sleeping enough. The taste of exhaustion is bitter and persistent, like medicine you can't wash away. But Miranda was building a fortress of evidence. HOA discovery violations, financial irregularities, and what appeared to be perjury in sworn statements were piling up like cordwood. The legal momentum was shifting, even if it didn't feel like it yet. Public opinion started turning when the security footage of the fence cutting went viral on local social media. Nothing like video evidence to cut through political spin. Agricultural organizations began offering support, and media interest intensified beyond the local gossip level. County officials started privately distancing themselves from the HOA's tactics. The prosecutor's office opened a formal investigation into the financial irregularities Miranda had uncovered. The walls were closing in, but Veronica was doubling down instead of backing off. The homeowner rebellion reached critical mass when 82% of residents signed an emergency petition demanding new board elections and governance reform. Even some of Veronica's initial supporters were jumping ship as the truth spread through the community like wildfire. But I knew this was just the warm-up act. The real fireworks were still coming. Wednesday morning brought the sound I never expected to hear on my ranch: helicopters. Not just one, but three, circling like mechanical vultures. By 6 a.m., my driveway was packed with sheriff's vehicles and a SWAT team was suiting up in my front yard. Someone had called in an anonymous tip claiming I was manufacturing methamphetamine in my grandfather's barn. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. The most dangerous chemical in that barn was probably WD-40, but here were 12 armed officers preparing to raid a cattle operation based on a lie. The team leader, Sergeant Rodriguez, looked as skeptical as I felt. "Sorry about this, Mr. Donovan," he muttered, the smell of tactical gear and early morning coffee mixing with the usual ranch odors. "Had to follow protocol." What made my blood boil wasn't the search. It was the anonymous citizen filming everything from the road. Professional camera equipment, perfect angles, footage that would mysteriously find its way to every local news station by noon. This wasn't spontaneous community concern. This was a coordinated character assassination. The media circus that followed was straight out of a nightmare. By evening, Veronica was on Channel 7 playing The Concerned Neighbor, her voice hitting those high notes that signaled incoming lies. "We're just worried about community safety and property values," she said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue that looked suspiciously unused. Social media exploded, with Pine Valley Drugs hashtag trending locally, fed by what looked like bot accounts and coordinated disinformation. The comments section was a toxic waste dump of accusations, assumptions, and amateur detective work that would have been hilarious if it wasn't destroying my reputation. My ex-wife received an anonymous package the next day, doctored photos, fake documents, and evidence suggesting our children were in danger. She filed for emergency custody modification before even calling to ask if any of it was true. The taste of betrayal is acidic and lingers longer than you'd expect. But here's where Veronica's masterpiece started unraveling. My security system had captured everything, including footage of her nephew, Danny, sneaking onto my property the night before the raid and planting drug paraphernalia in the barn. The timestamp was clear, 11:47 p.m., less than 7 hours before the SWAT team arrived. Miranda's IT expert traced the disinformation campaign back to accounts funded by the development group and HOA Legal Defense Fund. Every tweet, every Facebook post, every fake review had digital fingerprints leading straight back to Pinnacle Development Group's PR contractor. Here's a knowledge nugget that might save your reputation someday. Filing false police reports in Texas is a felony, especially when it triggers armed law enforcement response. The penalties get even steeper when you can prove coordination and intent to harm. Takeaway: modern technology leaves digital fingerprints, and every email, payment, and social media post can be traced back to its source. The federal investigators took notice when Miranda demonstrated how the conspiracy crossed state lines through electronic communications, wire fraud, racketeering, and civil rights violations. Suddenly, we weren't just talking about local corruption anymore. The neighborhood revolution reached a tipping point. Homeowners demanded immediate board resignations and threatened individual civil lawsuits for fraud and harassment. Local businesses publicly denounced the HOA's tactics, with several merchants organizing a boycott of board members' businesses. The personal vindication moment came when my ex-wife called, her voice heavy with guilt and apology. "I'm sorry, Maverick. I was scared and didn't think clearly. Those documents were obviously fake." The custody case was dismissed, and for the first time in months, my family felt whole again. County commissioners launched their own investigation and called for comprehensive HOA regulatory reform. Regional newspapers started editorializing against corruption, and agricultural organizations offered both legal support and public platform to share our story. The feed store owner, Earl, didn't just defend my character publicly, he offered to expand our business relationship and use our story in his fight against corporate agriculture pressure. "Sometimes, you gotta stand with the good guys," he said, his weathered handshake firm as granite. When hundreds of neighbors showed up for a solidarity rally at the ranch, the sound of community support was overwhelming. Kids running around, families sharing potluck dishes, veterans telling stories, and the unmistakable feeling that truth was finally winning. The smell of barbecue mixed with hope and determination. But the pressure was building toward an explosion. HOA bank accounts were frozen, insurance was canceled, and legal defense funds were exhausted. Board members started hiring separate attorneys and turning on each other like rats in a sinking ship. Veronica's law license came under investigation, her professional reputation was demolished, and word around town suggested her marriage was heading for divorce court. The sound of an empire crumbling is quieter than you'd expect. Just a series of small collapses that eventually bring down the whole structure. County commissioners scheduled an emergency town hall meeting to address what they called the community crisis. Regional TV stations, newspapers, and agricultural publications were planning comprehensive coverage. The stage was set for the final showdown. The taste of justice was getting sweeter, but I knew the real feast was still coming. Sometimes salvation comes in a shoebox carried by a 78-year-old woman. Mrs. Henderson appeared at my door on a Thursday afternoon, clutching a weathered cardboard box like it contained the crown jewels. "Maverick, honey," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "I think you need to see what my late husband saved." Inside that box was 40 years of neighborhood history, old survey maps, correspondence, meeting minutes, and legal documents that Harold Henderson had meticulously preserved. But the treasure at the bottom made my hands shake. The original 1967 Community Development Agreement, signed by my grandfather and the county commissioners. The document was crystal clear. Grandpa had specifically reserved all ranching rights and granted only a recreational easement for community facilities. Not ownership, not permanent transfer, just permission to use the land for neighborhood activities. The current HOA had never obtained legal title to the clubhouse property. They'd been operating on an expired recreational lease for over 15 years. Miranda nearly dropped her coffee when I showed her the papers. "This changes everything," she said, spreading the documents across her desk like a winning poker hand. "They don't own that land. They never owned that land. Every improvement they've made has been on your property without permission." The forensic accountant's report arrived the same week, and the numbers were staggering. $340,000, 0 cents in misappropriated funds, fraudulent contractor payments, and undisclosed kickbacks painted a picture of systematic corruption that went far beyond harassment. Board members had been stealing from their own neighbors for years. But the real bombshell was the development deal details. Pinnacle had promised to pay $2,100,000, 0 cents for the ranch property, plus the adjacent recreational land the HOA never legally owned in the first place. Veronica's law firm and 3 board members were slated to receive $285, 0 cents K in consulting payments for delivering property they couldn't legally transfer. Here's a knowledge nugget that could protect your property rights. A quiet title action is the legal process to establish clear ownership when property boundaries or ownership are disputed. Historical surveys, deed records, and continuous use patterns can overcome fraudulent or incomplete transfers. Takeaway: property owners should maintain copies of all historical documents and survey records, especially in developing areas where boundaries might be challenged. The power dynamic shifted like a landslide. Miranda filed for summary judgment on the parking lot ownership, supported by historical documents that were impossible to dispute. The county prosecutor opened a criminal investigation, and federal authorities expressed interest in wire fraud and racketeering charges. The financial house of cards was collapsing. HOA faced potential criminal charges and civil liability exceeding $800, 0 cents K, making it impossible to fulfill their development contract. Pinnacle Development was threatening to sue the HOA for breach of contract while simultaneously distancing themselves from the corruption scandal. An emergency petition signed by 78% of homeowners demanded immediate board resignation and new elections. The smell of panic was starting to overpower Veronica's expensive perfume, and her confident facade was cracking like old paint in the Texas heat. Regional investigative reporters were circling, pitched stories to statewide agricultural publications, and the narrative was shifting from neighborhood dispute to rural property rights versus corporate corruption. The sound of media attention was getting louder, and it wasn't the kind Veronica wanted. I realized I wasn't just fighting for my ranch anymore. I was fighting for every family that had been bullied by corrupt authority, every property owner threatened by development greed, and every community that deserved honest leadership. The taste of moral authority was different from personal vindication. It carried responsibility along with power. The trap was set, the evidence compiled, and the community mobilized. All that remained was the public confrontation that would expose the entire conspiracy and force complete accountability. Justice was coming, and it was bringing friends. The war room we set up in my ranch kitchen would have made a military strategist proud. Maps spread across the dining table, legal documents organized in color-coded folders, and the constant smell of coffee brewing as we worked 18-hour days preparing for the final confrontation. Miranda Torres anchored our legal team, her laptop always open, fingers flying across the keyboard as she compiled evidence that would bury the HOA's corruption so deep they'd need mining equipment to find daylight. Jake Mitchell, our forensic accountant, had turned financial fraud detection into an art form, tracing money trails that led straight back to Veronica's personal accounts. Sarah Chen, the investigative journalist who'd been following our story, became our media strategist. "This isn't just about one ranch," she said, spreading newspaper clippings across the table. "This is about corporate greed versus American property rights. The story's bigger than Pine Valley now." The Veteran Network kicked into high gear. Tommy Williams, our retired cop, coordinated security protocols and evidence preservation. Sue Martinez from the county clerk's office provided institutional knowledge about regulatory procedures. Bill Rodriguez, the electrical contractor, handled our technical security needs with the precision of a man who'd spent 20 years in the Marines. Pine Valley Truth had grown from a handful of angry homeowners to 65% of the community. The sound of coordination was beautiful. Phones ringing, neighbors sharing information, and the unmistakable energy of people who'd decided to stop being victims. Our encrypted messaging group buzzed day and night with updates, evidence, and moral support. Miranda's legal strategy was a multi-pronged assault that would have impressed Sun Tzu. Quiet title action for the parking lot, countersuits for harassment and defamation, criminal referrals for fraud, and civil conspiracy charges that could bankrupt every board member personally. "We're not just fighting them," she explained. "We're making sure they can never do this to anyone else." The private investigator's report on HOA finances revealed additional hidden accounts and questionable investments that made the $340.00 K fraud look like petty cash. Asset investigation traced funds through shell companies and offshore accounts, building a case for asset forfeiture that would leave the corrupt board members financially devastated. Here's a knowledge nugget that could save your community. RICO, racketeering laws, apply when multiple parties work together in a pattern of fraudulent activity. Civil conspiracy creates individual liability for all participants, meaning each board member could be personally responsible for the full amount of damages. Takeaway: document everything when fighting institutional corruption. Contemporaneous records and witness testimony create unbreakable legal chains. Sarah coordinated with regional media outlets, agricultural publications, and property rights organizations to ensure maximum coverage. The Pine Valley Truth hashtag was gaining traction beyond our community, supported by ranch advocacy groups and HOA reform organizations across the state. Local county commissioners and state representatives were briefed on the case, with several expressing support for regulatory reform. Security became paramount as we prepared for the final confrontation. Enhanced ranch security systems, personal protection protocols, and a legal observer network were established to prevent tampering or retaliation. Multiple copies of all documents were secured in different locations, with backup systems that would survive any attempt at destruction. The psychological preparation was as important as the legal groundwork. Family meetings prepared Skylar and Brady for the media attention and legal process ahead. Community healing frameworks were developed for post-conflict neighborhood reconciliation. I focused on stress management and physical fitness, knowing the fight ahead would test every ounce of strength I had. Technology played a crucial role in our preparation. Professional-grade documentation systems managed thousands of pages of evidence, with indexing that would make a librarian weep with joy. Secure communication networks coordinated allies across multiple time zones, while event planning logistics prepared for public confrontation with venue selection, security, and media access. The smell of preparation filled the ranch house, fresh ink on legal documents, the metallic scent of determination, and the earthy aroma of justice taking root. We had contingency plans for every possible HOA response, from negotiation to escalation to complete surrender. Community solidarity strengthened daily. Neighbors who'd been afraid to speak up were finding their voices. Shared potluck dinners brought families together, while planning meetings filled with the sound of cooperation replacing conflict. The taste of belonging was sweeter than any victory could be. Every piece was falling into place. Evidence compiled, allies positioned, media ready, and community mobilized. The morning coffee tasted like victory getting closer, while the sound of Veronica's confidence cracking echoed through the neighborhood gossip network. The countdown to confrontation had begun. Federal prosecutors were reviewing our evidence, criminal charges were being prepared, and the community was ready to witness the complete exposure of corruption that had poisoned their neighborhood for years. All that remained was choosing the perfect moment to spring the trap that would change everything. Desperation makes people do stupid things, and Veronica Ashworth was about to prove that theory in spectacular fashion. The Sabotage campaign escalated from petty harassment to full-scale property destruction that would have made a crime family proud. I woke up Monday morning to find $15,000, 0 cents worth of ranch equipment destroyed, tractor tires slashed, water lines cut so deliberately that my south pasture looked like a lake, and GPS tracking devices hidden on my truck like I was some kind of fugitive. The smell of diesel fuel mixed with muddy water created an odor that perfectly captured the stench of corruption. Tuesday brought a visit from the state veterinarian, responding to anonymous reports of diseased cattle that required expensive testing and quarantine procedures. The poor vet, Dr. Patricia Valdez, looked embarrassed as she explained the allegations. "Mr. Donovan, I've never seen healthier livestock, but I have to follow protocol." The sound of her equipment humming through tests we both knew were pointless was like background music to absurdity. The character assassination went digital in ways that would have impressed Russian disinformation specialists. Fake social media profiles sprouted like digital weeds, spreading rumors about the dangerous veteran, an unstable single father who posed a threat to community safety. The creativity was almost impressive if it wasn't destroying my reputation one lie at a time. Thursday's entertainment was an emergency restraining order claiming I was stalking and intimidating board members. The irony was so thick you could have used it for fence posts, considering they'd been the ones trespassing on my property for months. But Veronica's legal strategy was becoming clear. Make me look like the aggressor while they played innocent victims. Pinnacle Development sent representatives to the ranch with briefcases full of cash and desperation. The offer was $1,200,000, 0 cents, immediate settlement with a 48-hour deadline. More money than I'd ever seen, but less than half what the land was actually worth. The taste of temptation was real, but it couldn't overcome the flavor of principle. The economic warfare intensified as coordinated pressure hit my business relationships. Feed suppliers suddenly had supply chain issues. Cattle buyers developed mysterious scheduling conflicts. Even my veterinary services started getting anonymous complaints about liability risks of serving my operation. Property tax reassessment arrived like a perfectly timed punch to the gut, an $18,000 0 cents annual increase that coincidentally aligned with HOA pressure campaigns. The timing was so precise it would have been admirable if it wasn't criminal. Insurance complications followed, with anonymous complaints questioning the risks of ranching operations. But here's where their desperation started working against them. My professional security team was documenting everything with the patience of scientists studying particularly stupid lab rats. Every act of harassment, every trespassing incident, every illegal activity was captured in high-definition detail with timestamp evidence that would hold up in federal court. The restraining order became a legal trap when we revealed evidence of their actual harassment campaign. Miranda filed counter motions with documentation that made Veronica's claims look like bad fiction, written by someone who'd never heard of truth. Sarah Chen's investigative series was nearly ready for publication, coordinated with our legal strategy for maximum impact. The underground network of supporters continued growing, including local business owners who were tired of corruption and veterans who understood the importance of standing up to bullies. Here's a knowledge nugget that could protect you from similar attacks. Texas one-party consent law allows recording conversations when one participant agrees, making it a powerful tool for documenting harassment. Evidence of coordination between multiple parties to commit fraud elevates charges to felony level. Takeaway: keep detailed records of all communications and incidents. Patterns of behavior often reveal criminal intent better than individual actions. The smoking gun evidence kept accumulating. Wire recordings captured HOA board members planning sabotage and discussing bribes with a casual tone of people ordering pizza. Bank records showed payments from Pinnacle Development to private investigators hired to dig up dirt that didn't exist. Electronic evidence revealed coordination between the HOA, development group, and corrupted county officials. Physical evidence linked property damage to specific individuals through DNA testing and surveillance footage. The case was becoming so airtight that federal prosecutors were practically salivating over the RICO implications. Community fracture lines were becoming clear as homeowner rebellion reached critical mass. 82% of residents signed emergency petitions demanding board elections, while internal HOA conflict tore the corrupt leadership apart. Board members started hiring separate attorneys and turning on each other with the loyalty of sharks in bloody water. Law enforcement finally started taking harassment complaints seriously. The sheriff's department assigned Detective Maria Santos to investigate the pattern of criminal activity, and her preliminary findings confirmed what we'd known all along. This was organized crime wearing HOA badges. The calm before the storm felt electric. Strategic patience was paying off as I maintained normal ranch operations while the enemy destroyed themselves with escalating desperation. Family unity had strengthened under pressure, with my teenagers becoming advocates for their father's cause and examples of grace under fire. The taste of victory was getting stronger, mixed with the satisfying flavor of justice about to be served. They say cornered animals are the most dangerous, but Veronica Ashworth was about to prove that cornered criminals are just plain stupid. The nuclear option she chose would have been laughable if it wasn't so malicious. A coordinated attempt to frame me for manufacturing methamphetamine that was so over the top it belonged in a bad movie. The anonymous tip to the sheriff's department came with detailed descriptions of my barn, specific claims about chemical equipment, and even suggestions about when to conduct the raid for maximum evidence collection. The professional PR firm they'd hired went into overdrive, spreading stories about the dangerous veteran and drug-dealing rancher across regional media outlets with the efficiency of a military propaganda campaign. What really twisted the knife was the custody attack. My ex-wife received an anonymous package containing fabricated photos, doctored documents, and evidence suggesting our children were living in a drug house. She filed for emergency custody modification before the ink was dry on the fake reports, her fear overriding years of knowing who I really was. The IRS audit notice arrived the same week, triggered by anonymous reports of unreported income and tax evasion that would have been impressive if they weren't completely fabricated. The smell of bureaucratic harassment mixed with the honest scent of hay and cattle, creating an odor that perfectly captured the corruption trying to poison my life. But here's where Veronica's masterpiece became her downfall. The SWAT raid she'd orchestrated was filmed by her anonymous citizen, actually a videographer on the HOA's payroll, and the footage was leaked to news stations before the officers even finished their search. The narrative control was impressive, but the execution was about to backfire in spectacular fashion. The ranch security cameras had captured everything that mattered. HOA board member Danny Ashworth, Veronica's own nephew, sneaking onto my property at 11:47 p.m. and planting drug paraphernalia in the barn. The timestamp was crystal clear, the video quality was broadcast ready, and the evidence was unshakable. My IT expert traced the disinformation campaign to its source like a bloodhound following a scent trail. Bot accounts funded by development group money, social media manipulation services paid for with HOA defense funds, and coordination between multiple parties that created a federal conspiracy case prosecutors dream about. Here's a knowledge nugget that could save your reputation and your freedom. False reporting laws in Texas make filing fake police reports a felony, especially when they trigger armed law enforcement responses. Using electronic communications for fraudulent schemes makes it a federal crime with severe penalties. Takeaway: modern technology leaves digital fingerprints that skilled investigators can trace back to their source, making sophisticated lies more dangerous than simple ones. The federal investigation kicked into high gear when FBI agents realized the conspiracy crossed state lines and involved multiple violations of federal law. Wire fraud, racketeering, and civil rights violations suddenly put this case on the federal prosecutor's priority list. Community awakening reached revolutionary proportions. Homeowners demanded immediate board resignations and threatened individual civil lawsuits that would have bankrupted the corrupt leadership. Local merchants organized boycotts of board members' businesses, while county commissioners launched their own investigation and called for comprehensive regulatory reform. The personal vindication moment arrived when my ex-wife called, her voice heavy with guilt and genuine remorse. "Maverick, I'm so sorry. I was scared and didn't think clearly. Those documents were obviously fake, and I should have known better." The custody case was dismissed, and family healing began in earnest. Regional newspapers started editorializing against HOA corruption, while agricultural organizations offered both legal support and public platforms to share our story. The narrative had shifted from neighborhood dispute to American rancher defeats corporate corruption, and the media attention was becoming national. Professional validation came when Earl, the feed store owner, publicly defended my character and offered to expand our business relationship. "Sometimes you gotta stand with the good guys," he said, his weathered handshake carrying the weight of community respect earned through decades of honest dealing. The pressure cooker was reaching explosion point. Legal walls were closing from multiple directions as criminal investigations, civil lawsuits, and federal inquiries converged on HOA leadership like heat-seeking missiles. Bank accounts were frozen, insurance was canceled, and legal defense funds were exhausted faster than water disappearing in desert sand. Internal warfare tore the HOA board apart as members hired separate attorneys and turned on each other with the desperation of drowning swimmers fighting over life preservers. Veronica's law license was under investigation, her professional reputation was destroyed, and word around town suggested her marriage was heading for divorce court. The emergency town hall meeting was scheduled by county commissioners to address what they diplomatically called the community crisis. Regional TV stations, newspapers, and agricultural publications were planning comprehensive coverage of what promised to be a public execution of corruption. All evidence was compiled for devastating public presentation. Criminal charges were expected within days. Community mobilization was complete, with homeowners organized to demand accountability, governance reform, and compensation for damages. The stage was set for complete exposure of the conspiracy and final accountability. The taste of justice was about to become a feast. The Pine Valley Community Center hadn't seen this much drama since the Great Bake-Off controversy of 2019. 300-plus residents packed the room like sardines. Media crews jockeyed for position with equipment that hummed and clicked, and the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. County officials, law enforcement, and even an FBI representative sat in the front row like judges at a trial. Veronica and the remaining board members huddled at what looked like a defendant's table, their expensive lawyers whispering urgently while sweat beaded on foreheads despite the air conditioning. The smell of fear mixed with cheap cologne, and the metallic scent of justice about to be served. I stood flanked by Miranda, Sarah Chen, and a growing army of allies that included neighbors who'd found their courage, veterans who understood the fight, and families who'd been victims of the same corruption. The taste of community solidarity was sweeter than any victory I could imagine. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying across the silent room. 3 years ago, my family's ranch became the target of a criminal conspiracy designed to steal our property and enrich a handful of corrupt individuals. Tonight, you're going to see exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. The large screens flickered to life, displaying the timeline of harassment with supporting documentation that painted a picture of systematic fraud. Financial charts showed the $340.00 in misappropriated funds flowing through shell companies and into personal accounts. The numbers were so clear that even a kindergartner could follow the money trail. Then came the audio bombshells. Wire recordings of Veronica's voice planning sabotage. "We need to make him look unstable. Danny, can you handle the barn situation?" Board member Frank Morrison discussing bribes. "Pinnacle's offering an extra $50,000 if we can deliver by spring." The sound of their own words condemning them echoed through speakers like thunder. Security footage played on loop. Danny Ashworth planting evidence, board members trespassing, systematic vandalism caught in high-definition detail. The visual proof was devastating, but the crowd's collective gasp when they saw Veronica directing the fake drug raid setup was better than any movie soundtrack. Homeowner after homeowner testified about harassment, selective enforcement, and financial manipulation that had affected dozens of families. Mrs. Patterson, the sweet elderly woman who'd been feeding information to the HOA, broke down crying as she described the pressure and threats she'd endured. Professional witnesses delivered the killing blows. The land surveyor confirmed parking lot ownership with GPS precision. The forensic accountant detailed fraud with numbers that added up to potential life sentences. The IT expert traced digital manipulation back to its sources with the precision of a surgeon. Sheriffs, Detective Santos, stood up with evidence boxes that looked like Christmas presents wrapped in justice. Based on our investigation, criminal charges are being filed against 5 individuals for conspiracy, fraud, false reporting, and civil rights violations. That's when Veronica's facade finally cracked like ice in spring sunshine. "This is a witch hunt," she screamed, her voice hitting notes that could shatter glass. "I was protecting this community from a dangerous man who owns the land your clubhouse sits on," I interrupted, my voice calm as still water. "The land you've been illegally collecting dues on, making improvements to, and trying to steal through fraud and harassment." The courtroom drama peaked when FBI agent Rebecca Morrison, no relation to board member Frank, stood to announce federal charges. "Wire fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy charges will be filed in federal court. This investigation has revealed a pattern of criminal activity that extends beyond local jurisdiction." Here's the mic drop moment that made the room go silent. Effective immediately, I'm exercising my property rights as the legal owner of the HOA clubhouse land. You owe me $47,000 in back rent for 3 years of unauthorized use. I paused, letting that sink in. However, I'm willing to lease the property back to this community for $1 per year, provided we implement governance reforms and ensure this corruption never happens again. The spontaneous applause lasted 5 minutes. People were crying, hugging, and expressing gratitude that went deeper than words. The sound of community healing was like music, chaotic at first, then harmonizing into something beautiful. Veronica and 2 board members were led away in handcuffs, their expensive lawyers following like funeral directors. Asset seizure orders froze personal accounts, while court orders protected homeowner funds from further theft. Live television coverage broadcast the confrontation across the region, and social media exploded with footage that would go viral within hours. The David versus Goliath narrative captured national attention from agricultural publications, property rights organizations, and HOA reform advocates. The unanimous vote for immediate board elections and governance reform was just the beginning. Community healing had started, accountability was being served, and a new chapter was opening for Pine Valley Estates. As the crowd slowly dispersed, neighbors who'd been enemies shook hands, families who'd been divided found unity, and a community discovered what was possible when good people refused to be bullied by corruption. The taste of victory was everything I'd imagined, but the flavor of community restoration was even sweeter. 3 years later, the Pine Valley Community Center hosts a very different kind of gathering. The 3rd annual Freedom Fest draws over 2,000 visitors for music, barbecue, and education about property rights. The smell of mesquite smoke mixes with the sound of children's laughter, a far cry from the tension that once poisoned our neighborhood. Veronica Ashworth is serving her 3rd year of a federal prison sentence for conspiracy and fraud. She was ordered to pay $285,000, 0 cents in restitution, and her law license was permanently revoked. 2 other board members received probation and community service, with lifetime bans from HOA governance. Their attorney faces disciplinary action from the state bar, while Pinnacle Development Group settled a federal investigation for $2,300,000, 0 cents, and withdrew from Texas operations. The community transformation has been remarkable. Our new HOA board operates with transparency requirements that would make government officials jealous. Monthly financial reporting, open meetings, live-streamed online, and a homeowner oversight committee with real teeth. Property values have stabilized and actually increased as families discover what it's like to live without corruption. My ranch is thriving beyond anything I could have imagined. The cattle operation has expanded, my partnership with Earl's Feed Store has grown into a regional supply business, and agricultural exemptions have stabilized property taxes. Most importantly, my relationship with Skylar and Brady has never been stronger. They learned lessons about courage, integrity, and standing up for what's right that no classroom could ever teach. The Pine Valley Ranch Scholarship now provides $25,000, 0 cents annually for local kids pursuing agricultural education, veterinary studies, or rural community development. We've funded 12 scholarships so far, with recipients studying everything from sustainable ranching to rural law. The conservation easement protects 15 acres as a wildlife corridor, serving as an outdoor classroom for environmental education. Here's the final knowledge nugget that ties everything together. Texas Mavericks law now requires HOAs to provide annual independent audits, transparent governance, and formal appeal processes for violations. Homeowners have strengthened rights to access financial records and challenge board decisions. Takeaway: individual courage can create systemic change. One person standing up to corruption can protect entire communities for generations. The broader impact continues expanding. I speak regularly at property rights conferences, agricultural events, and HOA reform seminars across the state. The story has been featured in documentaries about rural preservation and become a case study in law schools for ethical governance and community organizing. Legislative changes include enhanced protections against adverse possession attempts and requirements for clear title documentation in HOA disputes. County officials now provide independent oversight of HOA financial practices, and state agricultural commissioners actively support rural property rights against development pressure. Our ranch hosts monthly veterans gatherings that have become legendary for their therapeutic value and community connection. 4-H and FFA chapters meet here regularly, teaching suburban kids about agricultural heritage and rural values. We've trained HOA board members from 6 counties in ethical governance and conflict resolution. The phone still rings weekly with calls from homeowners facing similar harassment campaigns. We've helped families in neighboring counties avoid foreclosure, challenged corrupt boards, and connected victims with legal resources. The network of property rights warriors now includes over 800 families across Texas. Publishers are interested in a book deal, documentary producers are planning follow-ups on legislative impact, and national agricultural organizations want me to testify before Congress about rural property protection. But the most rewarding recognition comes from neighbors who stop by to say thank you and share stories about their children learning to stand up to bullies. Next month, we're taking on a corrupt city council that's trying to force annexation of rural properties for tax revenue. The same tactics, the same playbook, but now we have experience, resources, and a proven track record of victory over institutional corruption. This morning, I watched the sun rise over land that's been in my family for 3 generations and will remain for 3 more. The coffee tastes like freedom, the wind sounds like justice, and the future looks brighter than Texas sunshine. So here's my challenge to you. Drop a comment with your own HOA nightmare story. You're not alone, and there are ways to fight back. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear how we're taking on that corrupt city council next month. And remember, sometimes the best way to protect your property is to fight for your community. The American dream is still alive, but sometimes you have to defend it with everything you've got.